if it could have prevented those people from losing their lives to gun violence in the future while preserving our Second Amendment rights, we had an obligation to try. And this legislation met that test. And too many senators failed theirs. I've heard some say that blocking this step would be a victory. And my question is, a victory for who? A victory for what? All that happened today was the preservation of the loophole that lets dangerous criminals buy guns without a background check. That didn't make our kids safer. Victory for not doing something that 90% of Americans, 80% of Republicans, the vast majority of your constituents wanted to get done? It begs the question, who are we here to represent? I've heard folks say that having the families of victims lobby for this legislation was somehow misplaced. A prop, somebody called them. Emotional blackmail, some outlets said. Are they serious? Do we really think that thousands of families whose lives have been shattered by gun violence don't have a right to weigh in on this issue? Do we think their emotions, their loss, is not relevant to this debate? So all in all, this was a pretty shameful day for Washington.
That's just a portion of what the president had yesterday. And it's tough when it comes to politics, but I believe it was genuine anger there. And while they knew before the vote late yesterday it wasn't going to pass, still the reality check that where we are now, not that long after Newtown, we saw what we saw yesterday prompted a lot of reaction, but I want to read a couple comments, and many of you may have seen this editorial penned by Gabby Giffords. She's standing right over the right shoulder of the president when she did the address. Of course, she, the then Congresswoman from Arizona, who was shot by Jared Loughner in Tucson and made a miraculous recovery. She said, and I'm going to read just a couple portions of it, "Senators say they fear the NRA and the gun lobby. But I think that fear must be nothing compared to the fear the first graders in Sandy Hook Elementary School felt as their lives ended in a hail of bullets. The fear that those children who survived the massacre must feel every time they remember the teachers stacking them into closets and bathrooms, whispering that they love them so that their love would be the last thing the students heard if the gunmen found them." And she also said, "Speaking is physically difficult for me. But my feelings are clear. I am furious. I will not rest until we have righted the wrong these senators have done and until we have changed our laws so we can look parents in the face and say, we are trying to keep your children safe." And Eric, she spoke directly about your children there. She talked about what people, those fortunate, still live with every day. And I meant to ask you, what is it like, only a few months removed from that awful December morning for your kids?
My 10-year-old's adjusted very well. He has always been a pensive, kind of introspective child, and he had some tough questions for me that I couldn't answer about, why would someone shoot children, target children like this? And who can answer a question like that? My daughter Lauren, the first grader, in Miss Rourke's class, the challenge my wife and I always had with Lauren was free spirit's a kind way of putting it. She's probably one of the most determined, brave children I've ever met. And then, something happened, after the shooting where she's more fearful now. And we even have to be careful in the house that the other day I just upstairs dropped my shoes and wasn't thinking, and any loud noise instantly startles her, and she calms down pretty quickly now. And we've had psychologists meet with the children and go through multiple sessions and clear them and say they're clear, and say that in time that reaction will abate. But it's changed these children forever and forced them to grow up in a way that you never want your children to have to experience.
I want to bring in the rest of our table right now. We're joined by Brandon Bryce, Republican strategist and columnist, Washington Times. Obviously, Dominic Carter. And we're also joined by Andrew Whitman, who you heard from earlier. I don't want to put this on you, Brandon, but forget the right and the wrong here, okay? Mm-hmm. The math of this. If 90% of Americans agree on anything, right. If 75% of the members of the NRA want this, how is it good politics to do what they did yesterday? And I know right. There were Democratic senators who were cowardly as well here because they got tough elections coming up. So it's not all Republicans, but if just 15, 20% of Republicans followed through on this and said they do it, at least they would have put the House on notice.
Exactly.
How is it good politics, forget about good policy, to say no to background checks?
Well, you know, I'll be honest with you, Richard. I think this is the problem with Washington. I think what has happened is, and the president even said it, which I have to say, you know, of all the times I've been against what the president has stood for, I've got to support him on this. And I think the majority of Americans have supported it, and to say that, you know, we have to know who has firearms, and we have to know who's able to get those firearms. And we have to also look at it the fact that, listen, you know, anytime a senator has the audacity to say, well, you know, my future is more important than the lives of children. I mean, we have Sandy Hook, we have Aurora, we have countless examples. And let me be clear, I support gun rights, but I think, you know, even Republicans believe in knowing who has options and who has who can actually obtain these firearms. I mean, it's ridiculous.
If I can, Brandon, the NRA supported this.
Yeah.
Their membership supported it.
The membership
not only the membership,
right.
but even the leadership, if you go back to the early 90s, supported right. this idea.
Right. It goes back to the problem of Washington in that you have those senators who care about their future as opposed to what their constituents want. 90% of Americans want background checks. When you're talking about gun reform, I mean, we need to know who has these firearms, and moving a step forward, you know, I think the NRA has a challenge now. I think their challenge is, you know, how do they get out of the emotional vote? This is going to be an emotional vote for 2014 and could even lead to 2016. And getting on, I wanted to comment real quick on Senator Paul's comments. You know,
for those who don't know, he's called the parents props here.
Props. You know, the issue I have with that is, listen, I understand people use certain issues for politics, but now is not the time to say that. And I think anytime you have an emotional issue like that, that could come back to haunt the senator.
Here's the problem with the polling numbers that you referenced. Yes, 90% of people nationally say that they support background checks. When you ask in particular states if you support gun control, not universal background checks, gun control, the numbers are far more even, and in fact, in a lot
but
of...
that's not what was voted on yesterday, Andrew.
It doesn't matter, because when the politics come down to it in the primaries and in the general elections, the campaign ads against these senators won't be background checks.
I know a lot of people feel the way you do.
Be gun
I think
control.
You're wrong, and I think that people make that argument wrong. I think the American public is smarter than you give them credit
really?
for.
Go back through Obamacare. How many times have we gone?
How many
times have we gone through on this program? If you look at the individual aspects of Obamacare, people support it. When you ask, do you support Obamacare? They don't.
Let me tell you why there's a distinction. I believe with the difference. Who knows? You could be right. I could be right. But this is why I think you're wrong on this. This was about a background check, and specifically, this was real easy to understand. Should a felon be able? Time out. Be able to go online and say, I got $250, I want a gun, and be able to get it with nobody knowing who it is. Should somebody on a terror watch list get it? This is not trying to explain what kind of health coverage you can get here, what the eligibility is. This is simple. This wasn't assault weapons. This wasn't ammo clips. This was a background check. And Dominic, for me, I think the public got a civics lesson. All of us at the table knew about how Washington really works beforehand, but the public doesn't want to know, doesn't know. Now they learned. One guy in particular, Senator Coburn, I disagree with a lot of what he has to say, but usually he's one of the more principled guys. Right. He was for and meeting with both Manchin and Toomey. He came out and said, you know what, we should have background checks. All of a sudden, the Yahoo Larry Pratt that we had on this show, who tried to argue with me that bazookas should be made available for the general public, rallied up, I'm not making it up, rallied up his base, flooded him with emails and phone calls, And Coburn stood down, and he was one of the no votes yesterday. In a microcosm, that's the part of Washington that I think they peeled back the layer and the public saw just the filth of it, which is that you get to be gutless if you have an election, and somehow, some way, that's okay.
I don't know what to say, Richard, because you're 1,000% correct on the entire premise that you've made. A Republican at the table is saying you're correct. And what I just can't get over, and the reason why I'm being quiet, I'm sitting here watching one of the fortunate parents because his kids are alive. Yep. He's one of the fortunate ones. And he's standing here crying like a baby, and he's being called a prop? A prop? Like a theatrical production? A prop? Who are half of these nuts that are being elected to public office?
I don't know there's a political downside for Rand Paul today.
Of course there's not.
Yeah.
It plays well with his base.
What happened yesterday, and I'm going to shock you, I'm happy with what happened. I'm happy this failed because what it's done, it has shown a spotlight on the dysfunction that is Washington that we've all been feeling, and it has crystallized it into a single event. That train had started rolling the day of Sandy Hook. It picked up momentum yesterday. This will be led not, by men. It will be by mothers, by housewives, by people who recognize that we can do better and that there are simple, common sense things that we can do to stop not stop, but reduce gun violence in this country.
I hope you're right. I don't know.